Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to have three scientists and a magician. We're going to start out tonight with David Sackett. David Sackett was one of the most prominent physicians in medicine. He was born in Chicago, got his medical degree from the University of Illinois, his master's from Harvard, and then moved to Canada to McMaster University, where he was one of the fathers of the specialty of clinical epidemiology. I have his book, Clinical Epidemiology, sitting on my desk right now. It's a Bible. And he is also the father of evidence-based medicine. Big fad in medicine today. It's basically combining the use of computers with a lot of data and coming up with studies to draw conclusions about medical care. Sackett used the term first in 1992, and it basically means read the literature carefully, which all young physicians should be taught as a matter of course, but it's been taken to new political and economic levels as a sort of a power grab. Here's a report on David Sackett from McMaster University.
There's a number of things that Dave has had an impact, starting right back from when he first came to Canada in the 60s. He was initially recruited to come to McMaster, where they were starting up this new radical medical school. And so he was recruited to come there, and was the chair of the first ever Department of Clinical Epidemiology, which was at McMaster. Since that time, he's had a number of firsts, and his textbook on clinical epidemiology is considered the textbook that everybody refers to for ClinEpi.
Dr. Sackett's work in clinical epidemiology was in fact revolutionary. His work has forever transformed both clinical medicine and clinical research. Today, Dr. Sackett is regarded internationally as a leader in this field.
He's building a bridge between basic science and real-life application. And then the next bridge, which is what you might call evidence-based medicine, is a bridge between the research community and the practitioner community. And both those bridges are essential. You can't produce things in the laboratory that are then just handed off into practice. They actually have to be tested, because they often don't work the way that scientists hope.
It was in clinical applications, or practice, that David Sackett identified questions that needed a research approach. Many would argue that David Sackett's greatest skill is one of communicator, teacher, and mentor.
Quite a few medical students who were feeling very depressed and were wondering whether or not this was the right career choice for them. Dave happened to meet some of these students, and some of them were seriously considering dropping out of medicine and looking at another career. And he started a seminar series for medical students at one of the colleges at Magdalen College, where he would present patient scenarios, real patient scenarios, and they would talk about the pathophysiology of what was going on in these patients. And it turned these students around. They loved medicine, and they could actually see how the basic science lectures that they were doing and seminars that they were participating in actually would have some relevance.
Today, Dr. Sackett is thinking, writing, and teaching about randomized clinical trials.
I think the work that David Sackett has done himself and through the people who he's taught and influenced had an enormous effect on healthcare, just in Canada, but around the world. That is, examining whether things work, how well they work, and what circumstances they work, and how to translate that into effective care for people in real practice setting. I think the legacy for that will grow over the next few decades. The whole concept, though, of evaluation in clinical settings and the high standard that he's raised that to, and the high status that he's raised that to, have attracted a lot of the very best and brightest scientists into applied research.
I think the only certain immortality anyone has is in the generations that follow. I would hope that I would be remembered as someone who is able to encourage, occasionally inspire, show young people how to engage in academic medical careers, have the excitement and enjoyment of the process, and do good for patients.
We're going to move on now to Oscar Holderer, who died recently at the age of 95. He was the last of the Operation Paperclip scientists, the scientists that Wernher Von Braun brought from Nazi Germany to the United States to work on the Saturn rocket project, and Dr. Holderer was the expert in wind tunnels. Here's Matthew Bannister from the BBC4 Last Word on Oskar Holderer.
Oskar Holderer was the last known survivor of a group of German rocket scientists who moved to America after the Second World War. Led by Wernher Von Braun, they had been developing V-2 rockets for the Nazis at a research center in Peenemünde. As the war drew to a close, they fled from the Russian advance and surrendered to US troops. The scientists went on to play a crucial role in the arms race during the Cold War and in the American manned space program. Oskar Holderer was the wind tunnel designer and aeroballistics expert on the team, which was based at Huntsville, Alabama. The space historian Ed Buckby worked with Oskar Holderer for many years.
Well, Oskar Holderer was a member of the Von Braun team at Peenemünde. He was an engineer and working on a variety of things, and consequently was selected to come to Huntsville, Alabama, eventually as a part of the Von Braun team under Operation Paperclip. It was an effort to bring these scientists to the U.S. and support us in our efforts, and particularly in the missile business in the late 40s and early 50s.
And I believe that Wernher Von Braun handpicked the people who came with him. Why would he have chosen Oskar Holderer?
His specialty was mechanical engineering, and he had some experience with wind tunnels, and Von Braun put together a team that could conceive, design, develop, fabricate, and launch an entirely new system.
Did he bring the wind tunnel with him?
Yes, there was a small wind tunnel that was dismantled and brought to this country, and of course Von Braun actually brought 100 railroad carloads of V-2 components. It was a massive movement of equipment, and so yes, Oskar was a part of that team.
I wanted to come to America before World War II. My wish came true in 1945.
I met Oskar in 1961. I was the protocol officer for Von Braun. One of my jobs was to take visitors who came to visit Von Braun on tours. And one of our stops was the wind tunnel. I'll remember the building number, 4732. And Oskar was the guy who would greet us, and he would give us a presentation on the wind tunnel, show us what he was doing, and then he would crank it up. And that was an impressive experience for people to see a model of the Saturn V in this wind tunnel being tested at high velocity, and you could see the different waves of energy coming off the rocket. And so we would get an explanation of why that was done and what they were trying to learn, where should the fins be put and that type of things on the vehicle. He was about 5'10", kind of combed his hair straight down forward over his forehead. He had a very pleasant smile. You would never expect the skill that he had and the intelligence that he had. He was from the old school. He still used paper and pencil. He just never really became comfortable using a computer for design.
Nowadays, they do it with computer-assisted design. Not for me.
He really didn't talk about his past. He was more oriented to what we were doing today and looking to the future. Once they became Americans and became a part of the space program, I think they realized that they had an opportunity. And then when President Kennedy made the commitment that we're going to go to the moon, we're going to go within this decade and return astronauts safely to the Earth, that was the kickoff for people like Oskar to become a member of the greatest space generation. Oskar was a part of that team.
Ignition sequence start.
His contribution through the wind tunnel and aeroballistics contributed to the Saturn V. He had a special feeling about that launch, particularly the moonwalk launch of Apollo 11. I think he felt like that the team had really made their contribution to America, and they were proud to be a part of what we used to say, let's keep that dream alive of space travel, and we're still saying that today in the U.S.
We're going to move on now to John Nash, who died recently at the age of 86. He was the great Princeton mathematician who won the 1994 Nobel Prize in economics for his work on game theory, along with Reinhard Selten and John Harsanyi. Nash's brilliance was tempered by mental illness, and his story was told memorably in the 2001 movie A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe. Here's a summary of Nash's work from a Nobel website. John Nash arrived at Princeton University in 1948 as a young doctoral student in mathematics. The results of his studies are reported in his doctoral dissertation entitled Non-Cooperative Games in 1950. The thesis gave rise to equilibrium points in n-person games and to an article entitled Non-Cooperative Games. In his dissertation, Nash introduced the distinction between cooperative and non-cooperative games. His most important contribution to the theory of non-cooperative games was to formulate a universal solution concept with an arbitrary number of players and arbitrary preferences, that is, not solely for two-person zero-sum games. This solution concept later came to be called the Nash equilibrium. In a Nash equilibrium, all the players' expectations are fulfilled and their chosen strategies are optimal. Nash proposed two interpretations of the equilibrium concept, one based on rationality and the other on statistical populations. According to the rationalistic interpretation, the players are perceived as rational, and they have complete information about the structure of the game, including all the players' preferences regarding possible outcomes, where this information is common knowledge. Since all players have complete information about each other's strategic alternatives and preferences, they can also compute each other's optimal choice of strategy for each set of expectations. If all the players expect the same Nash equilibrium, then there are no incentives for anyone to change his strategy. Nash's second interpretation in terms of statistical populations is useful in so-called evolutionary games. This type of game has also been developed in biology to understand how the principles of natural selection operate in strategic interaction within and among species. Moreover, Nash showed that for every game with a finite number of players, there exists an equilibrium in mixed strategies. Many interesting economic issues, such as the analysis of oligopoly, originate in non-cooperative games. In general, firms cannot enter into binding contracts regarding restrictive trade practices because such agreements are contrary to trade legislation. Correspondingly, the interaction among a government, special interest groups, and the general public concerning, for instance, the design of tax policy is regarded as a non-cooperative game. Nash equilibrium has become a standard tool in almost all areas of economic theory. The most obvious is perhaps the study of competition between firms in the theory of industrial organization. But the concept has also been used in macroeconomic theory for economic policy, environmental and resource economics, foreign trade theory, the economics of information, to improve our understanding of complex strategic interactions. Non-cooperative game theory has also generated new research areas. In combination with the theory of repeated games, non-cooperative equilibrium concepts have been successfully used to explain the development of institutions and social norms. Despite its usefulness, there are problems associated with the concept of Nash equilibrium. If a game has several Nash equilibria, the equilibrium criteria cannot be used immediately to predict the outcome of the game. This has brought about the development of so-called refinements of the Nash equilibrium concept. Another problem is that when interpreted in terms of rationality, the equilibrium concept presupposes that each player has complete information about the other player's situations. It was precisely those two problems that his co-Nobel laureates Selton and Harsanyi undertook to solve in their contributions. Here's the 1994 award of the Nobel Prize to Nash.
Dr. John Nash, your analysis of equilibrium in non-cooperative games and all your other contributions to game theory have had a profound effect on the way economic theory has developed in the last 2 decades. It's an honor and privilege for me to convey to all of you, on the behalf of the Royal Academy of Sciences, our warmest congratulations. I now ask you to receive your prizes from the hand of His Majesty the King.
Here is Russell Crowe's speech at the end of A Beautiful Mind where he accepts the Nobel Prize. Nash never said this. This is movie fiction. But hey, it's pretty good movie fiction, where he credits his wife, who, by the way, died in the auto accident that he died in also.
I've always believed in numbers, in equations and logics that lead to reason. But after a lifetime of such pursuits, I ask, what truly is logic? Who decides reason? My quest has taken me through the physical, the metaphysical, the delusional, and back. I have made the most important discovery of my career, the most important discovery of my life. It is only in the mysterious equations of love that any logical reasons can be found. I'm only here tonight because of you. You are the reason I am. You are all my reasons. Thank you.
John Nash, who played Russell Crowe in real life. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. We're going to close with a magician, a basketball magician, Marques Haynes. He died recently at the age of 89. He played with the Globetrotters for 2 stints, and he's considered one of, if not the greatest dribblers of all time. He was the first Globetrotter inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in 1998, and here's some of his colleagues talk about him.
Marques Haynes, the ghostly man of dribbledom. Just look at him move with that bouncing ball.
The things that they do today, Marques started. Anybody dribbling behind their back or between their legs or naked face and shooting, Marques started.
Everybody heard of Marques Haynes. Out of all the guys that came up in that era, he was just that outstanding. He was a guy that could do the whole thing. He make you look good and he make yourself look good.
What he did was something that I could never do, and I could do almost everything on the basketball court. And just watching him, I mean, I would pay over and over again to watch Marques Haynes. Of all the players that played with the Globetrotters, Marques Haynes is probably the best pure basketball ever played.
After that, we have to close with Sweet Georgia Brown.